is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast, the podcast about the game, role-playing game Changeling the Dreaming. I'm your host, Josh, and with us is Pooka. Say hi, Pooka.
Hello.
And also with us is a very special guest, Ian Lemke, developer, writer for many games, including lots of Changeling the Dreaming. So, hi, Ian.
Hi, nice to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So, yes.
We come prepared with questions.
All right.
Yeah. So, Ian, what's your background in role-playing games, and how did you get started at White Wolf?
I had no background. It depends what you mean by background. When I started playing role-playing games when I was 7 with D&D. They just moved past the little white box when I started playing. It was the first blue box. So yeah, I've been playing for a while. I owned a game shop for a while. Obviously I was very much into games. And it was shortly after the game shop ended up closing that I decided, me and a friend decided we wanted to run a LARP because I went to a Shadowrun LARP that some friends ran at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. And I fell in love with the whole concept. And we just decided we wanted to do this. And Vampire the Masquerade had just come out, and we were like, this would make the perfect LARP setting. What it just seems like it's built for a LARP. And so we just dove in, and having no idea what we were doing, created our own system for it and everything, and started advertising it. We decided to do like this mini vampire convention, and LARP. I don't know how we managed to pull it off. Both of us were barely employed at the time. I mean, we both worked at a movie theater.
That happens.
But somehow managed to pull this thing together, and it was getting fairly close to when the thing was going to be happening. And I was like, we should invite the White Wolf people. And my partner Mike was like, they're not going to come. And I was like, okay, well, whatever. So I sent them a letter. Didn't hear anything back, and I was like, what the heck, I'll just call. So I called them, got Wes Harris on the phone. He's like, oh yeah, I bet to get back to you, we really want to come up. This was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I was like, really? That's awesome. I mean, I was hoping maybe they'd send us some books to give away as prizes or something, But yeah, a bunch of them got a van and came up to our little vampire LARP convention. You have to understand, this is before Masquerade was anything at all. The Camarilla, I think, had just started. They were in their like proto days. They were talking about it, and they really liked what we did. And next thing we knew, we were invited down to Atlanta to work on the Masquerade.
Oh wow! Was there like I got into White Wolf through LARPing myself.
Right.
So how did the was there like so there was your group? Was there like a whole bunch of independent LARPers of Masquerade?
Basically, there was a design team initially, about 12 of us, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Reinhagen, of course, and a bunch of other folks, and myself and Mike were invited to be part of that. And we had like a little conference on it over the weekend. We stayed at a hotel and just basically spent the whole day spewing out ideas on how to make this LARP. Mark already seemed to have a pretty solid idea of what he wanted to do, but
okay. So there wasn't like established little pockets of games ongoing or something.
No.
Okay,
No, we had just, I think we were some of the first people to run a vampire LARP in the country. So,
okay.
Like I said, the Camarilla was just getting started, but they were doing their own thing. And they were just, at that point, there were no rules for Masquerade or anything. They were just using dice.
Okay.
Sort of doing it as a social club. But
so you were sort of ground zero for what became Mind's Eye Theater.
Yep, ground zero for Mind's Eye Theater. I remember even when we were talking about doing the traits and such, we were all like just throwing out words and we're putting them up on a board and everything, then throwing out the ones we didn't like, and then Mark, I guess it was the Saturday night, ran a little LARP for us to use the proto rules we'd come up with over the weekend. So yeah, that was how I got involved with White Wolf. And then Mike and I both wrote for it, and then we were asked to develop it. And we also ran a number of play tests at various conventions and such. Didn't use our rules anymore. Just started using the White Wolf rules. And then we were asked to develop it, and then came on board. They actually only really had enough money at the time to hire one of us. So we agreed to basically split a salary, which was probably about as good as our movie theater salaries. Even split. Not really, but yeah, we did that for a while. But we both quickly went to full time. Not long after being there, I mean, Mike started working on Street Fighter, and I, of course, went on to start working on Changeling: The Dreaming, because I mean, I was in love with the concept of Changeling, which was, of course, originally called Fairy.
Yep.
When the first ad in the back of one of the I guess it was in White Wolf magazine where I first saw it.
Were you? Yeah, we've been trying to piece together from the very early books, sort of where Fairy, there was the Ars Magica influence, but like, so you were like very early on, or actually maybe Pooka, I think you could phrase this better. Where I'm going with this,
I'll try. Well, I suppose, as someone who didn't get into World of Darkness through LARPing, I'm curious about how that transition happened, how you ended up becoming the developer for, was it already called Changeling by the time you were assigned to it, or was it still Fairy?
I think it was in transition.
Okay.
I remember we were running one of the sort of playtest vampire LARPs or masquerade LARPs at Origins. I think was the first time I talked to Mark about it. And I said, I saw this ad for this thing, Fairy. I would love to work on that if there's any opportunity. And even at that point, I didn't think that would really even be a possibility. We were just still freelance writing for Masquerade at that point. And but then once I came on board with White Wolf, of course, pretty much every other day I was in Mark's office, like, okay, what are we doing with Fairy? What's going on? Can I work on this?
Okay, but had there been groundwork done on it before you came in, if there was ads and whatnot, or?
Only in the vaguest sense. I mean, again, Mark always had, for any of the new things, sort of had an idea of what he wanted to do in certain ways. I mean, but I was there pretty much from the beginning. Not to say that every decision that was made about the game was mine at all.
Well, it's a group effort, yeah.
Yes, it was. It was very much a group effort.
Were there any concepts that didn't end up making it into the game that,
Oh, God. I mean, sure. We went around on how to do some of my original ideas that did not happen. I wanted to do things probably, I guess, a little bit more like The Lost, in that I didn't really want to have kiths. I wanted you to sort of build your own fairy. Like there would be certain powers and such. And then maybe my idea was more like to have the houses and you'd be a member of a house, but your actual abilities and things like that sort of created your own fairy from different concepts. We ended up going with KISS because they really wanted to keep things in line with the other lines in World of Darkness, which I felt was a little rigid, but that's the way we ended up going.
Do you know how it, when I'm looking at the other things talking about the fairies, right? And it seemed like the concept of playing changelings sort of emerged a bit later. And at one point, it almost, like, if you read, I don't know how much the different books were based on what was coming, like how the whole information transfer.
Oh, they had no idea.
They were just making stuff.
No one had any idea what. Yeah, they were just making stuff up. I mean, especially in the early ones. I mean, there was no real idea of what. I don't even know. I honestly do not know if they originally. I don't think they originally thought they were going to have 5 games. I think Vampire was sort of the thing, and once that did well, I think somewhere in there we came across the idea of doing all these other lines. But I really don't know the story behind that.
Well, yeah, because you started a bit late for vampire. It's not like you started with vampire before vampire came out or anything.
No,
Yeah.
not at all. Not even with werewolf or mage.
Yeah.
But yeah, it evolved, and there were a lot of things that were written about about fairies, changelings in the early books that we just sort of had to either hand wave or sometimes we tried to make it fit if we could. The World of Darkness, it was as much a design decision as out of necessity that each line had its own perspective. And so it was considered that, just because it said something in a vampire book about changelings, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily true.
Oh yeah, but there could be ideas that was just curious where that.
Sure.
Yeah, because like in the Wraith book, which wasn't that long before, there must have been some development overlap there. It's talking about the fairies there, and it almost seemed like it sounded very much like Changeling the Lost, with you playing changelings and fairies coming after you, kind of thing, potentially. But I don't know if that was a concept or.
I don't remember that.
Okay, so that might have just whoever wrote that part just.
I'm just trying to. I'm curious about that now because I don't remember that particular aspect of it.
Yeah, that might be me reading between the lines a little bit, but yeah, it sort of seemed like this sounds almost like Lost.
Right.
It's also the kind of thing where it seems as though as it got closer and closer to Changeling's actual release date, the ideas started to percolate into the other books and became a little bit, bit by bit closer to the thing that actually arrived.
Well, yeah, because like I said, by the time I came on board with it, there were some ideas of what, at least the basic concepts of what this game was going to be. But yeah, so those were certainly, sort of bled out into the other games as they were written. I am really curious about what you're talking about, that section with Wraith.
I'd have to pull out the.
Love to read that because
it's in the first edition Wraith core. It's got a little half page on the fairies or whatever.
Okay, I could probably find that. I have my first edition Wraith around here somewhere.
Yeah,
we've been trying to do sort of archaeology with piecing it all together. So
that's a project.
It is.
Well.
Well, we thought we'd do everything in chronological order, so we started with Ars Magica.
Right.
not in detail, but just.
I think Ars Magica is the basis for all of it in some ways, right? But at the same time, you could sort of consider Vampire a reboot. The Ars Magica stuff is okay, maybe sort of. Some of it's the same, but some of it isn't.
Yeah, it's like they brought in the Tremere, but they didn't.
Exactly. There's a lot that's different. So I think the best way to look at it is World of Darkness is a reboot. Kept some things.
Well, in light of that, with Changeling, I guess in terms of themes and moods, because people often make these sort of assertions and say things like, oh, Changeling's not dark enough for the World of Darkness. But we've certainly discussed here, how it certainly can be. But beyond that, what did you feel Changeling as a game brought to that universe in terms of its themes and its ideas? Like, what new space did it kind of push into?
So the first thing I like to say to that is, if you read Changeling, the raw text, without looking at the art, you get a very different perspective of what the game's about and what it's like. It comes off a lot darker, especially if you go back and read some of the books, like the Dantean book, which was one of the first.
The Autumn People.
Autumn People, yes, the Autumn People book and such. It's a pretty dark game in a lot of ways because it's about hope being crushed. Now, that said, it definitely has an element of hope about it that the other game, that a lot of the World of Darkness lines don't, except for maybe Mage. Mage has infinite possibilities, right? It could go anywhere. But I definitely wanted it to, and we all wanted to have a little bit more of a sense of adventure, something a little bit more that you can, that fantasy sense of things, where you can go off on adventures and have a quest and do all of those things. But at the same time, it takes a little bit, I guess, from Arthurian in that sense of that, you have the heyday of Camelot, but then everything, the magic starts to fade. and that happens with every changeling, and that's the thing that's staring every changeling in the face, is they've only got so long to burn, and then eventually they'll burn out, and everything they were will be gone, and yet they'll still be there, and that's horrifying if you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you imagine have a friend who, and it is very much came to be a reflection of real life in certain ways too. I mean, I've always said Changeling is a game about gamers. And you have your friends that you grew up with, that you played D&D or World of Darkness with, or whatever role-playing games. You did this, you did that, and then they go off and they get the mind-numbing job that grinds them down, and they have 3 kids and so on and so forth, and suddenly they're gone, and that friend is still there. That friend is still out there, but suddenly you can't relate to them on the same level because they're not doing the same things you are, assuming you are continuing to do that sort of thing. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's it has that aspect of it, and that sadness. So I mean, rather than being dark and grim, I would say that Changeling can be more sad, and
that whole aspect of that theme and whatnot. Do you know where that came from? I mean, it might not.
Because Arthurian myth for me was a lot of what I saw with it. Because like I said, you have the heyday, Camelot's at its full, and then Arthur, becomes wasted away, and the knights start turning bad, and darkness starts taking over the land, and the magic is fading away, and so they have to go on the quest for the Holy Grail to bring back the magic.
But that's still a bit of a leap from that point to say banality, right?
Is it? I mean,
yeah. No, I'm not saying it's I'm not saying no. It makes sense. I'm saying somebody did. Trying to give credit there. Like, it seems not obvious.
I guess that's how I envisioned it. That was my, when I was working on this thing. I mean, and if you look at a lot of the core story of Changeling, it's straight up, King Arthur, with King David. And I think there was a little bit of werewolf that crept into it as well. Changelings being creatures of nature and such, that, banality sort of, and the idea of banality has shifted so much over time. And I give credit to a lot of the people who worked on Changeling 20, honestly, and taking it to, I think, a better level in some ways, and explaining it better because, I mean, early on, we were figuring out what it meant ourselves. And sometimes I'll say I made mistakes with it, I think. But because science can be glamorous, there can be glamour in science. It depends on how it's used and what you're doing with it, and what its purpose is.
I can think of a few people who will cheer when they hear you say that.
Yes.
So.
Well, again, I think Changeling 20 brought that out very clearly.
Yeah. It was definitely there. Like, the knocker, if you read in first edition, the knockers definitely embodied like technology is the wonder in technology too. But
and I think that was always intended. It just, we didn't explain it well enough. I think that, we would just say science, and thinking in our own heads, pharmaceutical companies or something, where or oil companies and that sort of thing, when that's not really, but there's other things. I mean, it was the moonshot, it was landing on the moon, which is, of course, it involves a lot of technology that reopened the trods. So
and it's not like anybody working in it back then in the early 90s or mid 90s in White Wolf would probably had like a PhD in science and was doing research on the side or something, right? Like, it's
well, I knew a lot of people who did, though. But again, though, that research science can be incredibly banal, depending on the nature of it. I mean, it can just be running spreadsheets day after day after day after day,
or funding applications.
Exactly. In that aspect of it, things that can just destroy you. And I've seen it destroy people. They go into science. You can almost use it as an analogy for a changeling in a way, in that they go into science thinking, I'm going to make these great discoveries and do these cool things. And then the reality is that they spend all their days poring over spreadsheets and filing for funding and all those minutiae, which is nothing of what they thought science was going to be.
I'm just going to jump in with another question.
Please do.
If that's cool. So you had mentioned that there were, there were a bunch of people involved. Who else would you say was kind of like, I guess, who was your team in terms of assembling the game and bringing it to fruition?
I mean, I think the core team was myself, Mark Reinhagen, and Sam Chupp.
Hmm.
Sam had a lot of influence over it too. Came up with a lot of cool stuff. But those were sort of the three of us that were working on it every day.
Hmm.
Certainly, everybody in the office probably contributed some way, somewhere, or somehow at some point or another. Those were the three of us who were really working on it from day one.
And then as developer, because not being in the industry, I'm somewhat unclear on exactly what that entails all the time. Did you kind of have a plan for the direction you wanted the game to go in, or was it more just people brought ideas and you said, cool?
Well, okay. Developer can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I was one of the designers. As one of the designers, it was all of us. And Mark clearly at that point was the lead on it. And that, in the end, what he said went, no matter what we, if we wanted something different. Changeling cards.
that is the tough question on my list.
I was against those things from day one. I did not want to have cards needed to play the game. I cannot tell you how much I was against having the cards.
Was it purely just because that was the craze and people thought?
It was purely the craze.
Yeah.
It was insisted that we absolutely had to have cards be part of the game. And I admit I probably sabotaged it in some ways, in that the cards probably could have been better incorporated and been more of a game within the game, but I absolutely did not want that for a couple of reasons. One, it went against meshing with the rest of the World of Darkness. So if changelings need cards to play to play the game, how does that fit with everybody else? If somebody else if you're playing a mixed group or whatnot, I didn't feel it would work well for crossover play. Two, if you want to play a game of Changeling and you're over at your friend's house and it's like, hey, let's play Changeling, and you happen to have your book, but you don't have these cards that you specifically need for the game, then your friend needs to get the cards too. You can't just play. And something that's important to me with any role-playing game is that you be able to just play. When I was a kid, some of the most memorable sessions I have are when I was at camp and we had almost nothing, but a couple of books, or even in the back seat of a friend's car, while their parents were driving us somewhere, or, at a convention or whatever. But you don't always have these. I did not want something that limited your ability to play. So I kept cutting back what they did.
So you're also behind, because there's optional rules in the book on using dice, not cards.
Those were 100% mine.
Well, and it's funny because, so I started with second edition, and then when I went back and started collecting first edition books, and they kept saying things like, draw a bunk card. I'm like, what does that even mean? Because the cards were long gone by the time I started, so.
Exactly. And that's exactly why I didn't want there to be cards, because you'd have to keep printing them. What if we ended up not printing them anymore? I just saw so many problems with making them an integral part of the game.
Yeah. And that seems like the key thing, because the action of having cards and playing cards, as part of the game does seem fun in principle, but making it necessary seems like too much.
Yeah. And for some people, it was fun to draw a bunk and have to do what's on the card. But I also felt that it was very limiting too, because you're going to be limited by what you have of bunk cards, right? Where I really like the idea of people being able to come up with their own and do something on their own.
The hard challenge, I think C20 did a pretty good job of this, but bunks as a concept, I can see how it makes sense from the cards, right?
Right.
But when you're coming up with the bunk yourself, depending on the player's mindset, that can be tricky, I think.
Right. And in a way, you can almost look at second edition as a transition. It allowed me to transition completely away from cards, but some of the concepts were kind of hard baked in at that point.
Yeah.
So, I couldn't step it too far away from whatever. Changeling Tunny, because of the time, distance, and the way it was done, sort of allowed them to, do that a little bit more.
Yeah, it sort of became mage focus rules, really.
Yeah, almost. Yeah.
So, did you have any hand in the Shining Host LARP
Nope.
creation? No. Okay. So
Almost nothing.
Because I know you came in with the LARP end.
Pete Woodworth would be the one to talk to about that.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if there was other discussions or what. Because
Pete's some of the awesome guy, and we work together a lot now. But
okay.
Pete Woodworth, if you're listening,
say Pete Woodworth, if you're listening, we would love to.
Exactly. You're on the list, Pete.
So, with second edition, were there things you knew you wanted to add, remove, or change? Sort of, or anything that pops in mind
besides the cards?
Yeah. I mean, two things were, of course, changing cards, but we already discussed that. The calling upon the weird and that aspect of things, of being able to manifest fully as a changeling in the real world, like everybody else in the World of Darkness could do. We didn't have that really at all in first edition, and again Changeling 20s made that even better, because it was sort of a tack on rule almost with second edition. But I think it made the game feel more connected to reality, when you could show up at, especially if you're playing a game with like multiple types of characters, werewolves, vampires, or whatever, in the same group, being able to like just bust out and, show up in your fairy armor with your blazing sword and, and your chimera at your side, it made it feel better to me. You didn't just look like some dude who's tagging along with the mage and the werewolf. But yeah, I think those are the two major changes between first and second.
There's certainly a lot of small ones, but yeah, those are two that stand out.
Oh, sure.
There was also, when we were doing our sort of deep dive into the first edition core book, I think halfway through recording the episode, I kind of realized I don't think the Fomorians are mentioned once in the entirety of the core book. And I wonder, how did that piece of the meta plot start getting worked in?
I will admit that was a hand wave, because the Fomorians were so tied in with werewolf.
Right, yeah.
We just didn't want to go there because... of course, in fairy mythology, the Fomorians are very closely tied in as well. And I remember Bill and I talking about this for quite a while, and we had different ways of maybe stretching it and making it work and everything. But in the end, it just felt better to just not go there and not paint ourselves into some corner. Again, that's the hazards of a game like, a setting like World of Darkness, where you have 5 major factions that are very different. Had we been designing them all at the same time, I probably, would have said, hey, no, don't touch the Fomorians, they're ours. Or, from the beginning, create a joint, a joint connection between, werewolf and changeling with them. They were just so different in werewolf.
Yeah, they did end up showing up later, though, but not the Fomori. Like, there was like this distinction now.
Right.
Later in Changeling. Is that...
You gotta remember, a lot of this is 25 years ago.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. But we don't know what you remember if we don't ask.
I'm currently developing 3 different games. Oh, no. So, yeah. Do you mean like...
there was the werewolf Fomori, right?
Right.
That's sort of the... possessed by the worm kind of people, right? And then later, not in the... Certainly... I don't know when it... Do you remember, Pooka, when it first showed up? Or
well, so the first edition core book for Changeling does have the Fomori as a possible antagonist, and they are presented as like, oh, we know the werewolves deal with them. But then...
Right. We just left it very vague.
Yeah. But then having the Fomorians appear later on...
I think, yeah. Oh, you're right. We did, didn't we? I think we made them something completely different, almost.
Yeah, things of the dreaming still, just Elder Dark or something. Yeah,
I think you're right. I'll be honest here. My memory is hazy. Exactly what all went on there. If I were to guess, it was pretty much as I said, that they kind of hand waved the Fomori and were like, yeah, they're over here. They do things, and then eventually decide we really wanted to have Fomorians, so just sort of assume that they're different things that they have very similar names. That's a guess, though.
And the Tuatha, for that matter. I mean, the Tuatha were also not in the first core book that I could
tell. The Tuatha are really, I mean, the She. I mean,
yeah. But as a separate, ancestral group.
You heard it here first, folks. They're canonically the She are just the Tuatha.
Wait, is there a debate about this?
Oh.
This is something.
Oh.
That I step into something.
Well, I don't know. I mean, my impression was that the Tuatha were presented as kind of like the parents of the Shi in particular. I mean, the parents of all Fae, but the Shi are like
You are
the
correct.
firstborn chosen,
Yes, but the
etc.
Shi they're basically descendant of the same thing. Dealing with 25-year-old memories here.
It's the mists. The mists come for us all.
Yes, different mists. I'm still active, but
Yeah.
to best of my recollection, the Tuatha De Danann and then the Shi were descendant of them. Boy, you guys are getting into some deep lore questions here on me. I'll be better prepared next time.
It's
No.
purely by accident.
Well, no, we don't. Yeah, we're not trying to be comic book guy here.
It's totally fine. Totally fine. This is bringing memories back. I'd have to go back and even read what I wrote at this point, but as I recall, it's the Tuatha De Danann and then the Shi are descendant of them. And as you said, that they're essentially their parents, but they are of the same species. I don't know, whatever you want. The same line.
Groovy. Maybe we should leave the lore questions to one side.
Feel free to ask. I'll do my best. But if they're really deep ones like that, who knows?
Well, I do have a more sort of outside the game question, which is that, I mean, I guess in the late 90s, as second edition was kind of coming to fruition, how did, I guess, the changes in the gaming industry, the publishing industry, other folks have said that kind of put the squeeze on many companies, including White Wolf. How did that impact Changeling? Because eventually there was the move to art house and everything, but what was that?
It had a lot of impact. I mean, you had two things coming in on tabletop role-playing games at that time, and the big one was card games. First, Magic the Gathering, and then everything else that followed.
Vampire: The Eternal Struggle, etc.
Rage. Don't get me started. I'm not going to go down that dark hole.
All good.
But there were those aspects. But I'm saying from the outside, like just taking away from the role-playing game market. People who, the new kids coming up who would have likely played role-playing games were playing Magic instead. And wouldn't even touch a role-playing game often. Or maybe played one instead of playing multiple ones. And then computer games too. I mean, that was starting to take its wedge out of it. And I mean, and I think overall the industry was withering for a long time after that, and then had this resurgence. I mean, partly, I think it was coming back even before D&D 5th. Yeah, there seemed to be more interest. I think people were tired of playing computer games, and wanted that face-to-face interaction some more. But yeah, it had those two things, and then with White Wolf itself, I will say I'm not going to get into the gruesome details, but within the card industry, mistakes were made, and large sums of money were lost. We went through multiple rounds of layoffs at that point, which was unfortunate, which hurt us all. I mean, it hurt morale. It just overall hurt us. And then before going to Art House, even. There was the great debate about Changeling going to black and white because all the books had been full color up to that point. And I was told basically if we want to keep printing them, we have to go to black and white, which was kind of a gut punch for me because I knew that a lot of people at that time were not going to take that well because going from color. If you go from black and white to color, people love it. But if you go from color to black and white, there's going to be some hue and cry.
And it's not like the Vampire or Wraith where always kind of worked to be in black and white.
Right. But it didn't really hurt it to be black and white. But Changeling kind of really needed to be color, I felt. I was, honestly, I got, after about around year 5 there, I'd gone through a lot with the company and in the industry and got kind of burned out. I remember having a conversation with my father around the time. I said, I love what I'm doing, but I don't know if I can keep doing it forever. and I'm gonna have to get fired first. I'm not gonna leave. And I didn't get fired, but third round of layoffs. There I went because they were just cutting everything back, and then Art House was happening, and I was actually offered to freelance, do a lot of the Art House stuff. And in retrospect, I really wish I had. At the time, I was hurting too much, and I couldn't do it. I just felt betrayed on a number of levels, and just couldn't do it. It took me about 10 years to come back into the industry. So
You don't have to get into details of it, but like, what sort of things did you do after?
What didn't I do?
Yeah, okay.
I was a loan officer for a while. I started my own business for a while. I did a lot of just mundane stuff for a good while. I was in, it was right around the 99. So I went into IT during the Y2K boom.
Perfect time.
Oh, it's perfect. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I did that for a while. I just bounced around to a lot of different things, and until I was at a birthday party with some friends, and one of my friends who, I ran a fantasy LARP for about 10 years too, that overlapped with my time at White Wolf and then afterwards. And which I may have borrowed a little bit of Changeling stuff for, but he had just gotten hired as the creative director for a computer game, this new computer, this indie MMO that was being worked on. We just got to talking, and I was like, oh, I'd be interested in that. And next thing you know, I was moving to Raleigh, North Carolina to work in the computer game industry, which I did for about 10 years. And then realized that got me back in enough that I realized that making computer games wasn't what I really loved. I really loved making role-playing games, and I wanted to give it a go, see if I could get back into it. And so I did. Here I am.
Huzzah!
Awesome.
I think it helped having a little bit of a name still in the industry. I was actually surprised. Like, I went to Gen Con to basically try and get some work, and go around everybody. I was actually shocked at how many people knew who I was still all those years later. So, but it was kind of nice being welcomed back like that.
Right on.
Yeah.
You've sort of been happy to see renewed interest in the game with the 20th anniversary.
Oh yeah, I did work on I wrote for it. I actually got to do some writing for it that was a little scary, and some that was really fun, because I didn't actually write any of the kits. And I mean, I came up with like sketch outlines for them. I'd be like, okay, they're this, these are what they're called, these are roughly what their powers are, blah blah blah, and then other people actually wrote them for the kits, and I actually got to write a number of the kits. I also did the Nunnehay section, which was terrifying to me, because I'm not Native American, and I felt a little weird doing it, but I did the best I could. Tried to give it as much respect as I could.
So, out of all of the things that you feel directly responsible for creating over any of the editions, what are the ones that, I mean, you mentioned calling upon the weird. Are there anything else, particularly in 20th anniversary, that stand out as, you're really proud of?
I was not involved with a lot of the rules section of 20th anniversary. Unfortunately, I sort of came in a little late, because they had already sort of gotten the ball rolling on it when I sort of got back into the industry. The timing just worked out that I could be involved with it at all. I think the team did some really amazing stuff, like particularly, like I said, just explaining banality, a lot, the way the arts and realms and their powers in general work. I think it just all works a lot better. I mean, honestly, for anyone new coming to Changeling who wanted to play, I would just highly recommend Changeling 20. I just think that's the way to go. Plus, it has almost everything in it that you would want. So, it's all there in one book. But I just think everything comes together a lot better than previously. Not to disparage my own work, but,
improving upon... Yeah, and improving upon what's there is very different than creating it in the first place. Like,
I was a 25-year-old kid at the time who'd never written a thing in his life, so I don't feel too bad.
For what it's worth, I still think, I mean, Changeling 20th Anniversary is a beautiful, beautiful book, but the second edition core book is still, I would say, maybe the most beautiful role-playing physical book ever created, because it's just so...
And there's a lot of heart in it. The Changeling 20 doesn't have a lot of the setting stuff in it that, all the oaths and things like that. I just, I really enjoyed bringing all that to life in it. I think the second edition really does a good job of making you feel the world.
And it's also like the first edition, like, okay, people make fun of the bunk cards or whatever, right? Like,
sure.
But the book itself, like, especially when you're not just focused on the rules, but just focused on, like, as a book on introducing you to this new game, and
Mm-hmm.
it's very well done and very different from other role playing books, like how it's just the structure, chapter structure, the layout, how much it gets you into the mood, how it builds things up over time. So you're not, yeah, both of us were just astounded reviewing, like going back over it in depth. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
either of us had really read it in detail, like to that level before, and it was just very well done. So
Well, thank you.
yeah.
That was, a lot of love went into it. I'll tell you that. I mean, I've just always had a big thing for, well, Arthurian myth and fairy myth. It's sort of, I don't know, something I've always loved, and so getting to do that was wonderful. I mean, one of my favorite books when I was a kid was my dad had a copy of Brian Froud's Fairies. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
Oh,
Yeah, and I just
yeah.
would just sit there for hours flipping through the pages. And
Were there any other books or media that were direct inspirations for the game? There are ones that I suspect, but
War for the Oaks.
that's the one that I was going to ask about.
Some of those War for the Oaks, which I'd read about 10 times.
Yeah.
Even before I knew I was going to be working on on Changeling. That was probably one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, it is kind of the Changeling novel.
Yeah, that was. I mean, there's tons of modern fantasy fairy stuff today, but back then that was about it. It was kind of unique at the time, and highly recommend to anyone who likes that sort of thing, because it really was sort of the grandmother, as it were, of modern fantasy. Those were, of course, movies. Legend, Labyrinth, all those from the 80s and such were inspirations as well.
Yeah, I live in the same city as Charles Dellent, where he used to sing every month, so I guess that. But yeah, I heard him sing folk music once at a pub not too far from me. But.
Nice. I've seen him at the Fairy Festival in Pennsylvania, but that's about it. He's a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's I can't really. Of course, I mean, I could say Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
that's the baseline for everything, right?
Oh, it's a role playing game.
Yeah. Definitely Lord of the Rings. But yeah, those were probably the big ones.
So, is there any newer projects? Doesn't have to be Changeling related or whatnot. Newer projects or things that you're either come out recently or coming out soon that you want to talk about or bring up briefly, or.
Sure. I mean, for a minute, I'm currently the developer for the Expanse role-playing game for Green Ronin. I absolutely love working for them. They're an amazing company, and just the people are amazing. And the Expanse has been. I was a huge fan from day one. When I first saw the novels, I saw the show, and then I immediately went out and got the novels and burned through them all. And it was really exciting to get to work on that. And then I also have another game, which I am the designer and developer for, which is Talisman Adventures, which, if you're familiar at all with the old 80s board game, Talisman.
Oh, very much so.
Friendship killer. But we made a role-playing game based on that setting, which was a challenge. Because the setting is so generic. I kind of leaned into that with it, made it very much a fairy tale kind of vibe. And I'm currently working on my own project right now, which is called Nevermore, which is a game of American Gothic horror. That's going to be all mine. I'm excited about that because it's the first thing I've ever worked on that wasn't an IP, already existing intellectual property or designed for someone else. Changeling was its own original thing, but it was still part of World of Darkness, and Mark was still really in charge. And this is the first thing that's going to be all me, everything, top to bottom. So that's really exciting.
Well, I'll have to check that out.
Nepenthe Games is my new company.
And speaking, do you have any ways that people can follow you online, social media, that kind of thing?
Sure. Twitter, it's at the Ian Lemke, and just the website for my company. It's Nepenthe Games. If it's kind
We'll make sure to get that into the show notes when we have them.
Those are the big ones. I mean, I have an author page on Facebook, Ian Lemke author as well. If you want to see my gaming stuff, that's really the best place to go. But pretty much everything is cross-posted between Twitter and the Facebook thing whenever I'm doing something new.
I have one very broad final question that I'd like to ask.
Sure, shoot.
Which is just, if you have one piece of advice or thing that you want Changeling players to take away from the game, like if there's, I won't be so trite as to say a lesson, but an experience or just some kind of idea that you want Changeling players to have, what would it be?
First off, and I say this with every game, make it your own and have fun. Just please have fun. Don't stress about the rules. As far as a takeaway from it, I think a lot of Changeling is about social constructs and how we work with and support one another. And I think that can be a big part of the game because generally Changelings have to work together to solve a problem or to keep each other from banality as well. So, look at how your character, what your characters, what lengths they'll go to help one another, and then, bring that into the real world.
Yeah. Something that I had mentioned when Josh and I were reading earlier is it seems like it's very hard to be like a lone Changeling, an independent Changeling within the game. Vampires can be anarchs and mages can be their own thing, but Changelings really, there's that theme of kinship that really holds them together.
It is. I mean, no matter which variety it is, having a community is a very big part of the game. I mean, the whole, the whole thing's built around there being a freehold and Changelings hanging out together, and it's the being together is what keeps them balanced too. It keeps them from going into bedlam or withering away. Because you can go either direction if you're on your own. It's very easy to go crazy in one fashion or another.
Yeah, thank you so much both for everything you did for creating Changeling and for letting us interview. This has been a wonderful time, and I was a bit nervous, but this has been amazing, and learned so much here about your history and how it ties in the history of Changeling.
Happy to talk about it. Happy to come back another time. Like you said, when you all get further along and you start, get your list of questions and more things you want to talk about.
I'd like to invoke the contract arc to make that happen.
All right. All right. I won't spend a willpower point.
So once again, thanks again, Ian. This has been Changeling the podcast. I've been your host, Josh.
And I have been Pooka.
And hopefully this will keep you from falling that little bit longer from falling to winter.